Welcome to the Compliance 911 Show, a no-nonsense podcast discussing hot topics for today's busy compliance professional. It's everything you wanted to know about regulatory compliance, but we're afraid to ask. And now, here are your hosts, Dean Stockford of M&M Consulting and Len Suzio of GeoDataVision.
Hey, Len, great to see you. Of course, spring is in the air, as we've discussed. So in our previous podcast, you were explaining the serious flaws in the 2023 CRA rule. In fact, you called them fatal flaws. You focused on the assessment area requirements and how they could result in meaningless and even misleading performance conclusions, which is very scary. But we didn't have time to get into the other fatal flaws, as you described them, embedded in the 23 CRA rule. I assume that you're going to cover those flaws today, right?
You got it, Dean. But before I delve into those issues, I want to reiterate my main point, which is that bankers may sit back and feel they have nothing to do because the regulators have already announced their intention to rescind the 2023 CRA rule. That would be a big mistake. I could tell you as a former state senator, I am well aware of the political implications, the public perceptions of the dramatic decision to repeal the 2023 rule. Bankers should not be indifferent to those implications. The administration has cited the ongoing litigation about the 2023 CRA rule as the reason to repeal that version of the regulation. And that's certainly appropriate. But is it in the best interest of banks and the regulators themselves to rely on that argument exclusively? To that question, I say a resounding no. It's important to show why the 2023 CRA rule was bad regulation that harmed not only banks, but the communities they serve too. It was against the public's best interest. But if banks fail to articulate why the 2023 CRA rule was adverse to the public's interest, they and the regulators will be attacked by liberal politicians who will give both banks and regulators a public relations nightmare and make it easier for a future presidential administration to revert right back to the 2023 CRA rule. Frankly, everyone, not just bankers, should support the proposed repeal of the rule. But the public needs to be educated about this. So it's important for bankers to understand the serious flaws in the 2023 rule and to educate the public about them. This can be achieved by submitting informed comments when the NPR is published and to have prepared statements for release to the press when they call asking the inevitable questions about the proposed repeal. If bankers show the public that the 2023 rule really undermined the effectiveness of the CRA as a tool to measure how banks are helping communities, there is a much lower risk of the rule being resurrected by a future presidential administration.
Now, I have to agree with you, Len, there on people being complacent and thinking things will just go away. So I think you've certainly articulated a strong case for bankers to be proactive about the proposed repeal of the 23 CRA rule. So let's dig into the details.
Okay, Dean. Well, in our last podcast, I did explain in depth how the assessment area regulations can potentially cause very unreliable performance evaluations. In fact, in some cases, the performance ratings could be meaningless and even misleading. So I encourage our listeners to go back to that podcast and take notes about the disastrous assessment area rules. Today, I'm going to focus on two other major flaws in the 2023 rule. First, I want to point out that the 2023 rule excluded several types of loans that are of great importance to the communities. Now remember, the Community Reinvestment Act is supposed to be all about measuring how banks meet the community's need for credit services. But if the regulation omits important types of credit, it falls short of its goals. So what important types of loans does the 2023 rule exclude? Well, first of all, multifamily mortgages are not counted in the retail lending test. In many communities, particularly in urban areas where low and moderate income families are concentrated, multifamily dwellings account for almost 2/3 of all the housing in the city. In fact, I looked it up in New York City, the 5 boroughs of New York City, 61.5% of all the housing in the 5 boroughs that make up New York City are multifamily dwellings.
Wow.
So this means that multifamily mortgages are an important type of financing critical to adequate housing in the defined community. For some unexplained reason, the regulators dropped any consideration of multifamily mortgages in the evaluation of banks' provision of financial services that are, quote, responsive to the housing needs of the community. Multifamily mortgages that contain affordable units are counted in the so-called community development financing test, but those mortgages accounted for only 7% of all multifamily mortgages originated during 2023. So the 2023 CRA rule surprisingly excludes 93% of all financing of multifamily housing. That is a critical omission, in my opinion, and it's something that should alarm community advocates, by the way, not just bankers.
Yeah. I mean, that's surprising to me as well. I mean, did the regulators offer any type of justification for excluding the multifamily mortgages from that retail lending test?
No, I read the preamble to the 2023 CRA rule where they explain or try to explain everything, what their thought process is or was, and what the public's response was and public input. But they didn't specifically identify why they decided to omit multifamily mortgages. I can only assume that in total, multifamily mortgages are dwarfed by 1 to 4 family mortgages, and the regulators inferred from that statistic that multifamily mortgages are only a small part of the big picture. In the 2023 CRA HMDA data, the market data, there were only 33,063 multifamily mortgages originated out of about 6 million mortgages reported that year. But in the urban areas, multifamily mortgages finance a very large part of the needs of the housing market. And of course, when you it's a mistake to look at a multifamily mortgage, one mortgage, the same as a 1 to 4 family house mortgage, because many of those multifamily mortgages are financing dozens, if not hundreds, of housing units, but to recognize there's only one mortgage. In effect, they're treated the same as a single family mortgage, thereby understating the true impact of multifamily mortgages on the housing market and fulfilling the needs of the community.
Yeah, and not to change the subject, but you and I have gotten into a lot, or I should say deep into some of the data on this under fair lending, looking at the units in a particular area for redlining purposes. But so what are the other important loan types that are excluded under that 23 rule, Len?
Well, believe it or not, another shocking one is that open-end mortgages are excluded under the 2023 CRA rule. Now, when I look back at the 2023 HMDA market data, more than 1 million open-end mortgages were extended in that market that year. Families, as you know, have relied on open-end mortgages to finance many of their family needs. If the 2023 CRA rule excluded these important types of credit used by millions of American families to finance their household needs, the education of their children, even support home-based small businesses, that again is another critical omission, and there is no explanation in the preamble to the final rule that explains why. But I can only say to everyone listening to this podcast, I would consider 1 million mortgages that are open-ended every year a significant part of the mortgage market. And omitting those mortgages consideration in CRA performance evaluations is a serious mistake. And again, not only bankers should be alarmed about this, but the community advocates themselves and liberal politicians who want a stronger CRA. Why omit a critical form of financing that's important to many families in the CRA rule? That, to me, is a big failure in the 2023 CRA rule. And then there's a third type of credit that's commonly used to finance small businesses. It's called asset-based financing. Typically, these facilities are extended in the form of revolving lines of credit, evidenced by a demand note. It so happens that a quirk of the CRA regulation, the legacy rule, by the way, as well as the 2023 rule, is that renewals are defined as situations in which the maturity date of a note is extended. However, in asset-based financing, demand notes are commonly used because the continuity of the bank's security interest could be disrupted if new notes were issued to replace old notes every time somebody takes an advance under the line of credit or it's renewed annually. So this means that renewals of asset-based revolving lines of credit are not technically qualified as renewals under CRA and therefore don't get reported as small business loans. This, I am sure, results in a substantial understatement of small business lending. Also denies banks that extend asset-based revolving lines of credit recognition for all those lines of credit they are extending. We are talking about the financing of needs of small business, which is the primary focus of the Community Reinvestment Act, ironically. In the OCC 2020 version of the CRA rule, the agency did recognize this omission, and they did reinterpret or redefine renewals so that revolving lines of credit evidenced by demand notes would not be omitted. But that was repealed when the agency rescinded that rule, and it was not fixed in the 2023 CRA rule. So there's another very important type of credit that pertains to small businesses that is excluded in the 2023 CRA rule, thereby, in my opinion, significantly undermining the effectiveness of the CRA as a measurement tool for banks fulfilling the need for credit services in the communities they serve.
Yeah, I agree. Big omissions for sure. So you explained the audience the second fatal flaw in the 23 CRA rule, the exclusion of certain types of credit needed by communities. So what's the third fatal flaw?
Well, the third fatal flaw, Dean, is the incredibly complicated performance rating system in the rule. Ironically, one of the good things in the 2023 rule was the delineation of calibrated benchmarks that could be correlated with performance ratings. Ever since the rule changed in 1995 and focused on specific quantitative analysis, the regulators never precisely defined how a bank's performance could be rated outstanding or high satisfactory or low satisfactory or needs to improve or substantial noncompliance. Exactly how did a bank's performance get converted to a, quote, rating when compared to the geographic and demographic benchmarks was never clearly explained. This has been a mystery for the last 30 years. The 2023 rule did provide reference tables with what they called multipliers, by which a bank could calculate its performance rating by comparing the bank's penetration rates to the market and community benchmarks. That was good, but it went way too far in the 2023 CRA rule. When we tested the performance rating system to see how it worked, it turned out that in many normal cases, more than 160 calculations and data conversions were needed for each assessment area. For the outside retail lending area, or the so-called ORLA, there could be more than 1,000 calculations if a bank had 8 or more what they call component geographic areas. So it was good, but it was bad at the same time, and it was overwhelming, and it was just it'll create great confusion if it's ever put into effect.
Yeah. Oh my God, are you kidding me? I guess, and I'm telling you, it's like a full-time job somewhere. How could anyone understand how the performance ratings were determined in situations like that?
Well, that's the problem, Dean. You can compute the results, but understanding them could be a challenge. And I haven't gotten into the gory details about data conversions to supporting conclusions, to recommended conclusions, to performance ratings, and then the application of different weights. Moreover, I haven't even said a thing about the community development financing test. All I am talking about here is the retail lending test. Believe me, I spent a few months poring over the rating system, and it is a doozer, as they say. So what good is a performance rating system that no one understands?
Wow. Yeah. No, I hear you there. And to sum up the points you're making about the critical flaws in the 23 rule is that everyone, the public, as well as bankers, should be supporting the repeal of that rule. I know it sounds a little bit kind of counterintuitive a little bit, but but yes,
hmm
we need to repeal the rule because of these fatal flaws that you certainly have pointed out for sure.
And that's correct, Dean. It should be a no-brainer. But it could get ugly if bankers don't educate themselves and the public about why the 2023 CRA rule should be repealed. When we next talk, I would like to suggest to bankers that they should support the adoption of some very easy changes to the legacy rule that will dramatically improve its effectiveness as a measure of bank service to the community and eliminate some of the shortcomings of the legacy rule. Aside from those benefits for bankers, it will demonstrate that bankers don't want to destroy the CRA, they just want to improve it.
Yeah, that's sound advice, Len, and I too would encourage our banking audience to review this podcast and the previous podcast regarding the 23 rule, and to listen to our suggestions for improving the CRA when we record our next month's podcast, because I know we've recorded a lot on this rule over the course of, I think, greater than a year now. So I, again, encourage our audience to go back and listen to those podcasts. Great advice, Len. Another super show. This is Dean Stockford from M&M Consulting.
And this is Len Suzio with GeoDataVision saying we hope you found today's podcast informative and helpful. And once again, please, we invite you to let us know of any topics you would like us to address in future podcasts.
Thanks for listening to the Compliance 911 Show. If you like the podcast, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. While you're at it, please give us a like and review to help others find the show. As always, links are in the show notes, and you can always find us online at compliance911show.com. Follow M&M Consulting and GeoDataVision on LinkedIn for all the latest news and information on compliance hot topics.